We are now live.
Yay.
So,
Awesome.
welcome everybody. This is uh, an exciting interview between the Epicedium Paranormal team and Michelle Belanger. Um, yeah, we're just hanging in for a couple minutes before everybody gets here, waiting for folks to show up. So, actually, this might be a really good time for introductions. I would love to hear some of your background, folks on the team.
Sure.
So, whoever wants to start, go for it.
I'll start. Hi, my name is Gail. I'm one of the founders of Epicedium Paranormal. We're a group of colleagues that worked on other teams together previously and decided we wanted to start our own. We launched about 2 years ago, and since then we've had a great experience, working with our colleagues and clients. I personally have been interested in the paranormal since childhood, and I think we've all had that experience as a kid that kind of triggers that like intrigue, like, oh, what's this about? And so that's pretty much what triggered it for me. And then I've had an interest since then with myself, my mom, and my sister, and here we are today.
Fast
Awesome,
forward.
lovely to meet you.
I'm Brittany. I'm also a co-founder of the team, and pretty much along the same lines as Gail here. Growing up, I had a haunting experience that lasted for more than a few years, and ever since then, just had like evolved and snowballed into me always wondering, like, well, what was that, and what else is possible, and what other kind of energy is out there. So yeah, we're really into research and history, and then different kinds of energies and trying to understand them and helping to educate our clients and other people as well. So, yay. Ronnie.
My name is Ron. I'm one of the directors of Epicedium Paranormal. Pretty much what got me started in the whole thing was growing up, having different types of experiences, pretty much with some bit of like a little bit of empathic and stuff, not really knowing what was going on with me, feeling things around me, seeing things that weren't technically there, that other didn't see. It just got me more involved into trying to figure out what was going on with me. Started getting into other groups. And as that prolonged, I started noticing I was beginning to be opening up a little bit more and more, and pretty much decided to accept it and go along with it, and figured that would maybe is my calling to do that. And I like taking that to help clients. That's probably one of my biggest things is in this field is helping clients, and it's just making sure that they understand what's going on and they're not alone.
That's awesome. And we have our last member joining us now. Hey, Tim.
Hi guys.
How's it going? We were
Hi
just
Michelle.
going through and doing quick introductions about like when your interest in the paranormal started, and yeah, just a little who are ya? And then we can get into fun questions.
Okay, so did you guys all answer already?
They
Yep.
did
Yep.
Okay.
indeed.
So I wish I had some like really cool story that I've had some experience like in my life as a child, but I really didn't. It wasn't until I the power of TV. Like I saw shows and I saw the investigations, and I'm in the law enforcement background, so I like asking questions. I like finding out the hows, the whys, and I always believe that there's an afterlife. I'm raised Catholic, and I believe in God, and I believe in reincarnation. Like I definitely know that there's more to us than just what's here now. I know that we're all just energy, and I just wanted to see that evidence firsthand. To go out there, do the investigations, and feel, and hear and see things, that luckily technology has allowed us to be able to see and hear.
No, it's exciting stuff.
And do you also want to introduce yourself?
I'm Michelle Belanger. If you know my face from TV, it's probably Paranormal State or Portals to Hell, or History Channel vampire documentaries that they really have gotten mileage out of. And I've been interested in stuff since I was tiny, and had the luck of being born in a family and raised into a family where it was okay to talk about the weird stuff, and I was encouraged to not only experience it but also to study it. So that's sort of how I ended up with everything. Was studying, writing books, and then I sort of face planted into reality TV for paranormal stuff, which wasn't my life goal, but it's certainly been a fun journey.
Neat.
Yay.
Yeah, so I think with that, I want to just open it up for your questions. I know you've talked a lot about what you want to talk about with Michelle, so let me not stand in the way.
Great. Thank you so much again for taking the time to answer some of our questions. I think one of our tagline is investigating the unknown, so we are always looking to have further conversations with our colleagues and fellow paranormal enthusiasts, get opinions, ideas, and insight and experience. So that being said, I'm just going to jump into it. Our first question is really kind of a timely one for paranormal investigators today, right now, especially here in the United States. Obviously, our country is in a time where we're kind of shy in regards to going to people's homes, their houses. So we've kind of been trying to navigate the past few months with our clients in terms of where we can't get to them due to quarantine and whatnot, how to help them with other means, because normally we would do a house visit and then from there determine if an investigation is needed. So what are your recommendations for teams who can't get out to clients' homes right now?
I mean, it's a tricky thing to try to troubleshoot. I mean, the first thing would be a lot more interview, and ideally interviews where you are, face to face like this, so that you've got like a Zoom call and you can sort of read a little bit of the body language, the facial expression, the vocal intonation, because that tells you a lot about where the client is coming from. Are they like, in mortal fear for what's going on? It also lets somebody with like Tim's background make sure that the client is accurately interpreting what's going on for them, because sometimes there are other factors and it's always useful to rule that out. So this is actually where some of the psychic stuff comes in handy, because you can do house cleansings, you can do readings at a distance. And maybe not everyone will feel comfortable or confident in doing that at first, but I suggest giving it a try. Like, try remote viewing the location. Like, from the comfort of your home, if you have an item or an object or a picture to focus on, what can you read from that, especially if a psychic is part of your group. I've also done stuff. Are we having a sound issue?
It's a little hard for people to hear, it sounds like.
Okay. Well, let's try just a little closer to me.
Sounds great.
Okay. The other thing I would suggest, well, I mean, COVID protocols being what they are, determining whether or not it is possible to do some of the investigation from the outside of the house. Like driving to the residence and, not just doing psychic remote stuff, but especially if you've got your items, Gauss meters and your K2 meters and whatever else you have, or providing the clients with certain equipment and giving them step-by-step instructions of how to set this up. And setting up a couple of like nanny cams, canaries, something like that, where you can get an eye on what's going on in the house and be able to view that remotely. So basically, it's a lot of learning how to make the technology work for you in a way that you wouldn't have considered it before. And I mean, really don't underestimate those remote cams, especially like if you want to be able to like look at something, especially like I've got a canary, and I know they make a couple of things that are fairly inexpensive at this point that just stream right to your phone. You can check what's going on. It gives you motion detector things. You can like look and watch it. You don't have to, in most cases, you don't have to pay to simply look. You're paying for it to hang on to the video for more than 24 hours. So that might be useful, especially if you want to like do long-term things, to see if you've gotten EVPs on that, to see if you've caught anything like on the camera. The motion detector aspect of those cameras and the night vision aspect is surprisingly good. So a couple of those as an investment. And those are things that when we're no longer in the age of COVID would be very handy for your investigations as well. And it's an investment of, a couple $100 at most. I think I got my canary for like 99. Um, so looking at different ways to go remote, different ways to keep the team separate, but also give them access to the property, and letting some of your psychic or sensitive members try to stretch their legs and see, can I read this? What is that experience like? Uh, with the understanding that you're not going to be 100% great at that at first. There's going to be a lot of questioning, self-doubt and whatnot, but you won't develop the capacity and you won't be able to measure whether or not it's accurate if you don't try.
Great. That's, yeah, I didn't even think about trying to do it from outside and setting equipment inside. So that's actually a really great idea. Stemming from that, also, we kind of feel like, due to not only the pandemic, but other items that are going on in the world right now, there's kind of a not a negative energy, but not as much. There's a lot more tension in the air right now. And so we were just curious what your thoughts were regarding that adding to potentially negative cases, because there has been, people have noticed an increase in negative cases lately. And do you feel there is an increase, or if this has any effect on that at all?
I've been talking with a number of folks with whom I troubleshoot like their psychic abilities, their sensitivities, shielding and stuff like that. And pretty much across the board, the language we've started to use is, it's like a hurricane, it's like a storm. Like right now, so many people are so stressed. There's so much tension. There's fear, there's uncertainty, there's anger. And regardless of where that's coming from, what's causing it, just sort of collectively, it's started to like swirl in the atmosphere. It doesn't have a direction. If you are sensitive at all, you can feel it. It's like this sort of like buzzing pressure. And some days are better than others, but there are some days where you just feel like it's hard to concentrate. It just feels like this is sweeping through you. And it becomes really difficult to hold your own boundaries, and especially hold the boundaries of like the space that you live in. And I think for that reason, uh, I do know numerous people who were not having problems before, who are experiencing a significant uptick in what they perceive as negative experiences, as intrusive spirits and entities, and especially as intrusive energy. And I think that's all connected. I think we're collectively really spread thin, really pushed past our ability to deal with stuff. There's also been an unprecedented amount of death in a short period of time, and that also adds its own type of energy to things. So it's not shocking to me that there are some opportunistic spirits and entities that are feeding off of that, feeding into that, finding the new chinks in people's armor, and finding ways to get into homes and deal like affect people where a year ago that wouldn't have been an issue. It wouldn't have been a problem. It wouldn't even have been all that possible. But we're collectively being worn thin. So then the next question is, what the hell do you do about it? Because we can't, say stop the world, let me off. We're in it. We're in it to the end at this point. We're riding that train like right off the cliff.
Yeah.
Yeah. That so there's also been I'm not sure if you agree with this or not, but there are certain television shows that tend to promote more negative cases. And so we find that there are clients that contact us, determine that it's a negative case when in fact it's not at all. Or let me put it this way, it's not negative in the way they think it is. It could just be a human spirit that's, not being nice as opposed to a non-human one. So what are your feelings on that, and how you feel is best to deal with a client that is determined they have a non-human problem when in fact it's just a standard paranormal one, or not even a paranormal one at all?
Like long before reality TV, popular culture and popular beliefs have had an influence on how people interpret their experiences. There's an author, Francis Yates, who writes about Renaissance magic, and particularly the Faust myth, the scholar who makes a deal with the devil and like Mephistopheles and all that stuff. Goethe writes about it. Kit Marlowe wrote Dr. Faustus. It was a significant story that was on the stage. It was a play. It was circulated in pamphlets. It was mostly fiction, and yet its representation of demons and demonic pacts and the way in which you call things up and some of the consequences were so richly portrayed that they kind of hooked into the imagination of people at the time. And what Yeats traces is it wasn't as if like beliefs in demons didn't exist prior to this, and it wasn't as if beliefs in magic and pacts didn't exist prior to this. It's that those beliefs slowly took on the shape of what people were seeing repeatedly. And that's something that's going on right now as well with the occult and paranormal in the media. The more popular the show, the wider the audience, the more reach it has, the more it will influence how people are inclined to interpret stuff. In many cases, those shows are the first places people will encounter some of these ideas. So if they've had experiences and they didn't have a word for it or context for it, and the only thing they've got is, pick the show where like somebody's getting possessed every 5 minutes because there's about half a dozen of them. Uh, that's what they're going to conclude is,
Right.
oh God, clearly something banged the door and it must be a demon because this is what I'm seeing. This is how it's being portrayed. And I don't have any better context. And honestly, you almost have to know what you're looking for if you want to start looking for books that would give you better information. And heaven help you if you just decide to Google whack it. Like if you don't know what you're already looking for and you just like, what is a demon like? How can I tell if I'm possessed? Just try Googling that. Like that's a YouTube episode all by itself. So how do you deal with that or combat that? The first thing is, at least for my own way of dealing with clients, I find it imperative to find out where they're coming from first. Like, what is their belief system? What is their worldview? What do they have room to reconsider or to reframe? This is as somebody who worked with Paranormal State, where an awful lot of the clients were Catholic and very devotedly Catholic, where we had Josh Light and Ilfie Music, both of whom were pagan, and myself. It's not like we went in and we were like, well, what you need is you need a high priestess to come in and cast a circle and burn some sage, because that wasn't how a Catholic would deal with that in the first place. That wouldn't be like that wouldn't even mean anything. In some respects, that would be as scary as having a ghost in your house, having a witch in your house.
Yeah.
So figure out what they believe, what they're comfortable with, and find out what their language is and try to talk to them in that language. And then in my psych background is showing, but in cognitive behavioral therapy, there's this thing called reframing, where you gently guide someone to sort of look at something from a slightly different perspective. And you can't do it by saying, well, this is how it is. Like people are just naturally going to like push past it. But it's more about going, okay, so what you think that this is a demon, what things has it done to make you think that it is a demon? And here are some resources that give us guidelines to tell whether or not, okay, here's what the Catholic Church says about that. Like just for straight up Catholicism, because for the longest time they had the most organized resource for basically a literal checklist of, is it demonic? Is it possession? And if you go down that checklist with someone and they're like, well, the thing that I'm experiencing doesn't hit any of these, have you considered like that it might just be this? And to some extent, when we're doing investigations with clients, exploring all the possibilities is really important, especially because sometimes it's not a ghost at all. It's not a spirit. There's nothing paranormal. With Paranormal State, it never quite made it to the actual episode, but in one case, the client was experiencing the onset of menopause, and she really didn't quite figure out that the hot flashes weren't something attacking her. Like they were so new and so weird, and like when you say hot flash, you don't quite realize what that actually feels like. Like suddenly, like randomly, for no explanation, like you're just on fire from the inside out, and like all of these other sensations. And in her case, if you're familiar with the theory that especially like young girls who are starting to go through puberty will have poltergeist phenomena, nobody really explores the other end of that. But there were poltergeist-like phenomena that were going on with her as well that we were pretty sure had something to do with just the hormonal shift and all of like the turmoil and stuff that results from that. And sometimes you have to really think like not so far like not just outside of the box, like you have to kind of like invent a completely new box to figure out what's going on. But getting the client to be there, that's what requires compassion, the ability to listen as much as you also talk to them. A certain amount of psych background really helps, like somebody who's got some familiarity with psychology, counseling, therapy, because that also, I know that some clients, if you bring a psychologist, are immediately going to think that you are judging them and telling them that they're crazy. And it's important to let people know that you bring in a psychologist or a counselor or a therapist, and it's good to have somebody like that on your team because living in a haunting, having something like this happen to you that is so far out of your ordinary realm of possibility is traumatic. No matter how like yeah, it's real. It can be 100% real. There's no delusion, no misinterpretation, and there's some need to like talk about that. It's perfectly understandable that somebody would start to have problems, nightmares, things that are tied in with it, because holy shit, like things are flying off the walls. You wake up and there's something like hovering over your bed. How do you not have trauma from that?
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. We actually, one of the things we do that I think might be a little different than a lot of teams is we get a questionnaire filled out before we even like do a house visit. And a lot of the questions are on there regarding health, prescriptions. Are you seeing a psychiatrist? What are your religious beliefs? What are your paranormal beliefs? And honestly, it's one of the most vital things we have found when working a case, because before you can even step in their house, you kind of have an idea of who they are. And it does really help a lot. That being said, the other side of the coin is obviously the sensitive part where we know the facts, but then we have sensitives on the team as well who kind of help validate or unvalidate any problems going on. And that being said, I think Ron has a set of questions regarding sensitives on team.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest questions I know also for myself and other sensitives I spoke to is, during these times right now, being at home a lot more, that as you were saying earlier in one of the answers you gave, with a lot of open sensitives out there right now, dealing with everything going on around, the pressure, feeling the different things out there of all of some of the negativity and everything like that. I mean, what kind of steps or idea or thought process would you say to somebody that's maybe being at home all this time, being around all this, is maybe opening them up to something that they maybe had a little bit of, but now they're opening more and more because of everything going on? Like what kind of things could help them?
Develop good psychic hygiene. I don't know what better term to call it. Being aware of like what does your energy feel like? What does your internal world feel like when you are in your best, most grounded, and most centered state? And recognizing when you're starting to get pulled out of that and when it's definitely something outside of you pulling you, making you feel bad, making whatever. So learning a good sense of like what is your internal voice? And when is that something from outside of you shifting that? Whether it's subtly influencing your emotional state, just making you crabby, making you feel like really crowded in a space, giving you intrusive thoughts that are definitely not you. And then I harp on grounding, centering, shielding as sort of like the basic toolkit thing that everybody should have. And so in a nutshell, grounding is just finding some way to let go anything that has destabilized you, made you feel like chaotic, if there's something that feels intrusive, whether it's negative or just too much of something, finding a way to let it go. The classic grounding, again, if you just randomly Google it, you will probably see an exercise that is like decades old at this point, where you imagine that you're a tree with the roots that go down into the ground, and it helps to, like, actually take your shoes and socks off and like put your feet on the ground if you're really having trouble with the imagination part, and you just let everything flow down and out of you. But it's important to know that flowing down, like that whole I'm a tree and this is my taproot, doesn't necessarily work for everybody. Anything that you do that just lets it go. So for me, sometimes it's like if I'm really having trouble grounding, like if I can go for a drive and just like roll the windows down and let the wind take it. Or especially at like a client's house, if I was doing like an intense thing and I just needed to shake it off, I would nip into the bathroom, because here's a little space where I can now be. It's space I can control, just me. Close the door, turn on the taps, put my hands under the water, and have the water be a little cooler, and just let the water, that very tactile sensation of the water first, bring me back to my body, bring me back to me. But also, like, all of the rich psychological associations we have with water as something that cleanses us, let that be the focus, to just let it all go down the drain. And then centering is just finding your center after that. You've released a bunch of stuff, but you're still unbalanced. You're still kind of getting pulled in different directions. So taking a few moments to just take a few breaths and allow your sense of self, your consciousness, whatever you want to call it, your point of perception, to just turn that inward and find wherever the center of you is, where you feel whole and balanced and safe. And take a few moments to be there, to be in that space. And then from there, you'll have a good sense of your boundaries, of like where you end and begin and where everything else is. So expand some of that, like around you physically. The classic visualization is going to be visualize a ball of white light around you, or ask God or whoever to put this white light around you, and whichever way works best for you, whether you are pushing the ball of white light, whether you're asking for help with it, whether it's fire or you're putting bricks, like whatever imagery works for you. The bottom line is you are making a boundary, you are affirming that boundary, and it's top, bottom, front, back, every side of you. It helps to think of it as literally your bubble of personal space. Because for some people, that's like real close up to themselves. For some people, it's an arm's length, and it may change by situations. But think about your bubble of personal space and just reaffirm that. And if you're having trouble personally feeling like you can hold that, absolutely ask for help, either from a higher power. If there are spirits that you work with, ask them to have your back. Ask them to look out for you. It's exhausting to like kind of try to watch your back constantly on that side. And I think it's one of the greatest uses of having a spirit companion or a spirit guide is they're already over there, and they can kind of like be your psychic goalie before you even have to worry about it coming to you. Also, taking care to do things to make your space as healthy for you as possible. And being aware that that's not just, tidying house, but it can be opening the windows and letting some fresh air in. It can be rearranging the furniture because just for some reason the room doesn't feel right. Uh, when you are confined in the same space over and over again, you will probably discover that certain things bother you more than they would if you're coming and going and you're not stuck in that space. So spend some time just in each room, especially the rooms that you spend a lot of, like you are obligated to be in, and just sit in it after doing a little bit of that centering and feel it. Like get a sense of like how does this feel? Am I comfortable in this space? Start with your eyes closed and just what parts of the room don't feel right. What do you have to change to make that feel healthier for you? And some of this requires a little bit of like, let go of your rational self. Don't worry if it doesn't make any sense, but go with how it feels. And the final thing is there's a technique called warding, warding, and that is basically an extension of shielding, but where you shield yourself, you ward a space. And you can do this for individual rooms, and you can do it for the entire home, where instead of just doing the grounding for yourself, centering for yourself, shielding for yourself, you extend that to the entire space. Catholics will put St. Benedict medals up over doors and windows or in the four corners. New Agers are more inclined to put something like selenite rods in the four corners or quartz crystals. It's less important about like what specific thing. Those are important based on what are your beliefs and what speaks to you, like what reminds you that this space is protected. And it can be as simple as literally walking to each of the four walls and reminding yourself that this is a space that keeps the wind out, that keeps the heat and the cold out. This is your space. And nothing comes in unless you open the door and allow it.
Yep.
Mhm.
Okay. And I guess also the other thing, talking about, sensitives and everything on teams and helping out with going to cases and stuff. What's your thoughts about with teams having, say, a skeptic on the team? Do you think it's beneficial to have a skeptic on the team, to have maybe like that little bit of balance for when you're in someone's house and stuff?
It depends on the type of skeptic because, again, television has sort of promoted skeptics as the naysayers, the like, I just don't believe in anything. But if you go back to the classic Greek root of skepticism as a philosophical approach to reality, it is I need to see it, I need to experience it, I need to balance it for myself. So it is a questioning mindset. It's the person who will poke holes in things and ask questions until they get to an answer that feels comfortable, that they really think answers things. So a skeptic who is the classical skeptic in that they want empirical evidence, they want to ask hard questions, they want to examine every possible avenue before they commit to an interpretation. That is absolutely helpful, and honestly, I think everybody should develop that level of skepticism, no matter what your particular experience of the world is.
Mhm.
The sort of career skeptics who mostly, as far as I can tell, just get off on telling everybody that it's all bullshit and you need to believe that it's all bullshit. And why are you believing in this? Because clearly only knuckle dragging idiots believe that ghosts are real or God is real or anything.
Yeah.
I find that problematic, and not just for teams, but just sort of reality in general. Because again, it's not actually where skepticism comes from. It mostly seems like somebody's projecting a lot of anger at the fact that at some point belief was really important to them and they had the rug pulled out from under them, and now they're very angry and blame everybody because belief cheated them once, and they don't want anybody else to be cheated like that. So healthy skepticism, yes, and I think each team will have to determine what qualifies as healthy skepticism.
Right.
Okay.
Makes sense. Yeah.
And I think one of the other things, one of the last things I wanted to ask was for, again, with everything going on, going out places, even just your job, you're going out to work, doing your everyday activities. What about like ways if you know that you have certain energies following you that might be following you home because you just happen to walk by somebody with everything going on, had a bad day, and some of that energy's pulled off of them and is now following behind you because maybe you had a little bit of a bad day, you didn't cut enough cords, things like that, and it was able to grab a hold of one of them and follow. I mean, what do you think would be a good way to be able to help prevent that, or it not maybe prevent it, but be able to at least be able to push it off to the side enough to protect yourself?
If you remember kind of early on with COVID, when they weren't totally sure how it was passed, one of the things that they would, like on the extreme end of trying to protect folks, if you had a home, especially with somebody who's immunocompromised, one of the things that they suggested was before you walked through the door, like take your clothes off, like decontaminate. And it's not a bad idea right now, especially if you, are working in an environment where you know that there's just a lot of stuff that you say you're a trauma nurse, say
Mhm.
you're a doctor working in a COVID ward, like that is a lot psychically that is coming back with you. So before you bring that into your home, like at the threshold, taking a few moments to clear that all off, like almost like literally wipe yourself down. If you are someone where smoke cleansing, like with sage or some related thing, is useful and meaningful for you, that wouldn't hurt. Or like some of those little spritzes that are the spritzy equivalent of smoke cleansing. Um, any there's a years ago, this pagan Teethorn Coil had suggested their method was almost like kind of like peeling off a second skin, almost like shedding like a snake, and just like letting all of that like go off, and then just give it back to the earth and let the earth handle with it. So finding a way before you bring it into your space, before you kind of like have that sweep in after you, make a break. If you are driving to and from places, let your car become sort of like your airlock space, where you're coming from the place that you want to let go. Do most of the work of letting it go and clearing and releasing in the car. If you have to, sit in the driveway for a little bit, listen to some music, like,
Mhm.
roll the windows down, do something to just.
It occurs to me that's like a whole new meaning for car wash. But it also seems really useful. Like
Yeah.
it's a memorable, like, in this space, this is what happens.
Well, and also, if you're commuting, you are in a transitional space. You are in a liminal space, going from work to home. Take advantage of that. Take advantage of the very liminality of that space, as I am now making a transition so I can let this stuff go. I mean, we do it a little bit just psychologically, as we are kind of trying to let go. Yeah, we're thinking about what was going on in work, but as we get closer, like, we start thinking about home. So, like, make part of that a conscious effort to not only let go of what the stress was and what your projects were, but also any energies that might have come along with that. If you notice that you're still having a problem with something that's like sunk hooks into you, my first recommendation is always get a second opinion from a friend or colleague whose ability to perceive those things you trust, because we have a lot of stress right now, and it is so difficult to diagnose ourselves even on a good day.
Mhm.
So always get a second opinion, because they might be able to see the solution that's too close to you to see. Like how you got hooked in, like what you can do, like what's the simple thing to get this out of you, or even this isn't actually bad. This is this other thing. Um, so get an outside opinion first, and then if it does prove to be something that has attached itself to you, follow the usual protocols, which cutting cords, clearing, banishing, hunt it down, wad it up, stick it in a pile of salt, burn it, use a spirit nail, drive it down, stick it, or my favorite thing, which is asking some of my spirit companions, sick 'em.
I love it. That works.
Um, so, in reference to actual investigations, sometimes people perceive sensitives as being shiny, like spirits
Yes.
around are like, ooh, that's pretty. I want to check that out. So, how would you discern between a spirit that's actually a problem in the location of your client versus something that might have just seen you there and gone, oh, I'm going to go check this out?
Observing things at the location, which obviously in COVID times is a little bit more difficult, but how does this entity or energy seem to interact with and impact other things and people in the space? If there are pets, especially, how do the animals respond with or around this? Uh, it's one of the things. So, like, night terrors, hag attack, like, that is something that's commonly reported, and a lot of people will conclude that they're haunted when this is happening, but there is a very basic physiological cause for it in some cases. And the way to tell, is it just one person is having night terrors and that's physiological, or is there a haunting, is observing independently and just having people report, are multiple people having similar experiences at the time? Were they able, like without necessarily communicating to one another? So observing, like, is it only happening to you? Is someone else responding?
Mm-hmm.
Keeping in mind that many people who don't think of themselves as sensitive will still respond. So is there a particular room that this seems to be prevalent for you? How many people seem to avoid that room or have a reaction to that room? Like, just look at their body language. They may not even realize that they're uncomfortable, but their body language will tell you a lot. Somebody's standing in the room with their arms crossed, or they're super fidgety and they've got no reason why. It's not just you.
There's actually a question from viewers that goes right along with that one. With the pandemic and all the changes in how people think and how people connect and how energy is flowing, how does this change hauntings? Could people be haunting their own spaces more now?
Oh, that's actually a really good question, because so residual hauntings are when energy builds up in a space and is especially imprinted by intense emotion. And that emotion can be good, it can be bad. We mostly notice it when it's bad. And when we're spending a lot of time and a lot of focus in the exact same space over and over again, it goes back to good psychic hygiene. You want to clear that space out periodically. Not just physically cleaning it, but actually like clearing it out of energy, because you are wearing a pattern into that space. Everything that you're doing every day, everything that you're feeling every day, especially when those feelings are intense, it starts to soak into the space. And you can't necessarily see it the same way you can see all the takeout cartons piling up if you're not cleaning up after that. But you will feel it. It turns into this sort of feedback loop of emotion and perception. So if you are starting to get, like, really stir crazy, or especially if you're like feeling very, if you start to tip toward depression, and that starts to just really be a part of every day, and it gets more and more negative, the more that goes into the space, the more you wake up, you go to where you're always moping, and you just click right into that way of feeling. It's dripping from the walls. So you want to clear that, and in a certain respect, you are a residual haunting yourself. So you absolutely want to avoid doing that. Um, the simple way is, again, just be aware of the space, be aware of your relationship with the space, take some time to clear it and clean it, take some time to like keep good hygiene for yourself psychically, get a good sense of your boundaries. And, if you are in a certain corner of your home, if there's a certain room in your home, every time you go in it, you don't feel right, find where you feel okay. Spend some time getting a sense of, like, what does this feel like? And then just sort of go from room to room and go, what's the different, what's changed?
Mm-hmm.
Why do I feel like this in here? And if the answer is I always feel this way in this room, change something about the room.
That actually ties in really well with kind of our next set of questions that we have, which is regarding investigations that, everybody thinks, oh, it's human or non-human entities that are at a location, but there are also some out of the box possibilities for these investigations, and Britt's going to ask some questions about that.
Yeah. Okay, so have you ever on investigations encountered elementals or alien energies? What is your understanding of them? And then how would you advise clients on how to share space or property with these energies?
Okay, well, human hauntings are the easiest to deal with because they broadly still function on human psychology. Like, you can understand what they want and you can talk to them, and even if they're like super traumatized or really carried a lot of their anger forward, it's still relatable. Non-human entities get complicated, but by their very, very nature. So elementals are a kind of broad umbrella. At this point in paranormal lingo, an elemental is sort of like a nature spirit, a non-human entity, an intelligence that is attached to some elemental quality of the space. It might be tied to a tree, it might be tied to the land itself. there's a number of like folkloric things that we could kind of put underneath that umbrella, fairies and little people and whatnot, down to like wood nymphs and water nymphs and just a ton of things. Uh, Arguably, jinn would even fall there because of their connection to being smokeless flame. So the first thing to do with elementals particularly is there's still a tie to the world we know and understand. And if it's, even though it's not necessarily going to be a human consciousness to communicate with, there's still something that is relatable. It's tied to the natural world. And if you kind of take the perspective of like, if I were a being that represented this, like, what would I be like? Like, what would my needs be? What would my desires be? Um, it's a little tricksy to try to apply human emotions to them, but there's clearly some emotion. Um, there are definitely needs. Keep in mind that elementals especially end up being classed different from, like, say, demons or something that is demonic, is they're not really good or bad by human standards. They're more wild. And wild in the sense that, a wolf can do terrible things, but the wolf is not being anything other than a wolf when it eats the deer. So with elementals, if you suspect that that's what's going on, like the first thing to do is to assess the space, the land, different like points around the land. Like, is there something that draws your attention? Is there an underground stream? Is there a cavern system? Is there an escarpment of cliffs? Like, is there something that just seems more alive than the rest of the things on that land? It may be as simple as an old tree stump that just draws your attention. Um, and some of this is my Irish Catholic showing, but I was raised like, you go to that space that feels like the bottom of the garden, like the wild place where the human habitation kind of like drifts off and it becomes more the realm of something else. And you politely introduce yourself and you ask if there's anything you can do that could help or make things easier, and you leave an offering. Like, you try to be respectful, and that can open a dialogue with that type of entity, that type of spirit. It's important to understand that they don't necessarily always communicate the same way a ghost would. Like, it's rare to get like really easy language from them, but you might get feelings like being, it's difficult to process how that communicates. It is definitely alien in the sense that it's not a human mind, and it will be at least less alien than something that seems to be like the traditional interpretation of a shadow person as like an intra-dimensional traveler that is like clearly like an outsider. Like, there's something so alien that you're wondering why it even has a human shape. So elementals, there's still a thing that ties you, and your connecting point is the natural world, is the physical form of the world around the space. And then it gets more complicated because there are so many different types of entities. And I know that, our popular portrayal is if it's non-human, it's automatically demonic. And even if you go back to the roots of the word demon, it's not that simple. So for non-human entities, the next thing to go to assess is, does it seem to be malevolent? Like, is there an active, like, anger or lashing out, a fixation to cause harm? And is this thing, like, actively focused on the human beings in this space or the pets? Like, is it acting out? Is it targeting people? Is it conscious of them? Because some of the non-human stuff, it's just passing through. Like here's our reality, and it just sort of like happens to intersect with it, and has about as much awareness of us as we do of an anthill that we accidentally kick over. The ants aren't happy about the result, but it's not like you intended to hurt the ants and you kind of don't care. Like, you're just going to keep going. So some of the non-human entities are exactly like that, where we're the anthill they accidentally kicked over simply because they were going from point A to point B, and they will probably never be back. Or if that's a path that they always follow, and we happen to have been the very unfortunate anthill that just decided to be right in that pathway, you're going to have something that kind of repeatedly goes through, but doesn't respond to attempts to communicate with it, because what would you do if an ant like looked up and like, you know, shook its antenna at you and it was like, my anthill? It's easy to interpret those as evil or malevolent because they're doing things to us that we're not happy about. But the engagement is also a key thing. I have definitely done investigations with entities that I concluded fit my criteria for, well, I don't know what else to call it, but a demon. And let me say what those criteria are. It has to be intelligent and self-aware. It has to be, you know, demonstrably non-human. Like this is something that's never worn a human body outside of trying to, like, you know, skin ride somebody. It's never been born as a human. It is fixated on people for some reason, like actively malevolent, and targets people with that. And that's like really kind of the thing that cinches it for me. You know, hyper intelligent non-human things, there's a billion of those, but things that just for some reason really want to take it out on human beings and seem, the fourth one, they've never been human naturally, but they seem to really want to ride a human skin. Like they seem to really want to be part of this world. And the only way they seem to be able to do that is to slowly obsess somebody, overshadow somebody, and ideally to them, like actually crawl under their skin and start just doing things. And that is my criteria for demonic entity. You know, the end result of like wandering around in somebody's skin, they're inevitably like just chaotic, vicious. Like it's not like it's kind of like a nasty, poorly raised teenager joyriding in somebody's Ferrari when they finally do it. And I mean, maybe that's the whole goal, but so with that sort of thing, there's at least an intelligence you can appeal to. You can communicate. You shouldn't trust it. It's sneaky. It has there's really no benefit for that type of intelligence to work with you or tell you exactly what they're doing. Like they know what they want and they just hope you'll go away. And they're also usually aware that they can outlast any team. Like you're there for a little bit of time. They can wait. And they're cued in enough to like the human world to be able to know that, like they are weirdly invested in humanity.
So piggybacking off of that a little, another question from viewers is, can you elaborate? You'd mentioned before that the energy of fear can attract parasitic entities. Can you talk about that a little more? Is that mostly demonic entities?
So I think in a class I'd been talking about different types of energies and like emotional. So all spirits eat energy. I mean, like people in a physical body, like we need to sustain ourselves. We're not usually conscious of like the kind of constant energetic exchange from the environment that we get, or the small amount of life energy we get from eating an apple, or less so a hamburger. But spirits still need sustenance, still need nourishment, and they don't have the physical aspect to sustain them. It's one of the reasons why, you know, historically, when you're making an offering on an ancestor altar, it's not the orange that you're leaving. It's some essential part of the orange itself, but also the act of leaving this offering. You are giving sustenance to the spirits that you're working with. That doesn't stop things from taking things against your will. And parasitic entities, some of which are demonic. I mean, demonic entities are absolutely cheerfully like lapping up as much as they can from people, especially because it will weaken the person they want to crawl into. And more than that, elementals, a little bit less. They almost by definition have less of an interest in our type of energy. They're more connected to natural things. Like that's what's sustaining them. But even human spirits. And then there's a number of lesser entities. They're not even really what I would class as sentient, as intelligent. Think of them as the rats and the cockroaches and the raccoons of the spirit world. There's a self-awareness. There's, they are distinct entities, and they are attracted to certain things. Uh, we don't necessarily find it problematic for the things that are attracted to and feed off of joy, delight. But when, especially like the worst case scenario, like say that you're super depressed and you've been in the same room for like the past 5 months and you haven't been cleaning it up and it's just a miasma of gunk, things will be attracted to that in the same way that vermin will be attracted to that room that if you haven't cleaned it in those 5 months. And those are the most common parasitic attachments people will come up with, like the psychic equivalent of a leech, where you just attracted this thing. It's not personal. You're just tasty for whatever reason, and your defenses have been eroded. We notice them mostly when it is negative, unpleasant emotions, when people have been going through, you know, terrible depression, dependency, a lot of trauma, because their boundaries have been compromised. It makes it much easier to get in, and they're kind of leaking energy. And it is a type of energy that, in this case, I will agree with Lorraine Warren, like attracts like.
Mhm.
Interesting.
Along those lines, I was just curious because what are your feelings like? So, like with elementals, you spoke about how they were in with the earth. What are your feelings about things not of this earth? Because we've now heard on some, TV shows the presence of alien abductions as opposed to actual like spirit hauntings. What are your feelings on that?
So there is an author, Jacques Vallée, who I read years ago, who made a really interesting case for both fairy encounters and UFO alien encounters to be essentially the same thing. And he saw these very much as like kind of interdimensional travelers, that we didn't have a better language or even like a better symbol set to try to interpret what was going on. Um, Generally, when I'm talking about stuff like that, I'll use the term outsider because they seem to be from outside. Like they're not attached to like the human world as we perceive it. They're not attached to like the natural world here. They're not attached to or native to like the spirit realm that's like just one step off, but still very much concerned with the sphere that we inhabit. They're from some elsewhere. Um, so the thing with aliens and little green men, in I have an easier time believing that aliens come here in spirit, or through like a kind of dimensional door, than I do the idea of physical craft delivering them to some farmer's backyard. And the line between, is it an alien or is it a puckwudgie, gets kind of weird sometimes. Not gonna lie. Uh, it may be a question of what is our framework for interpreting the thing we're dealing with. Do you call it a goblin because it crawled out of the earth, still from the outside, like from some deep outer realm? Do we call it an alien? And is that really the same thing in the end, and we're just using different language? For the purpose of especially groups that are client-based, that like your real purpose is to investigate for the people who are in crisis, I think the most important thing to keep in mind is what's the practical end result of diagnosing it as this, that, or the other thing. Like you want to focus on, I know it's this, and therefore I should do that. And in a lot of ways, giving answers to the client is more important. So part of that is, what's the client's worldview?
Mm.
Would aliens be easier than goblins or fairies? Would fairies be easier than aliens, or shadow people, or jinn, or whatever? And at the end of the day, allowing the possibility that these experiences are a lot more complicated than most of us would probably be comfortable considering. Uh,
Mm.
there's a Tibetan Buddhist way of looking at reality where it's sort of a pancake of different dimensions, different layers of existence, all mushed together and all happening at the same time. And the only difference is our ability to perceive it. And some of the beings existing in that pancake of locations, are aware of all of them. And some are like the ant in the anthill and can pretty much only see like the little ant trail and nothing more than that. And only ever notices that there's anything else if somebody steps on the anthill.
Mm.
And I think the real undiscovered country for any of us is trying to map that in any way that makes sense, like putting words to it. Uh, I think it's also really important to understand that those words are culturally and temporally influenced. Like they are these containers that we develop over the course of our lives, partly based on the pop culture we've imbibed, based on the books that we've read, based on the religion in which we're raised, the culture in which we're raised. So what is obviously a jinn to somebody with an Islamic background is a duppy if you're in Jamaica, and might be a poltergeist to us, and it might be a demon, and it might be five other things, because for those cultures, they're kind of like the catch-all for all of the phenomena. Or it's a kumiho if you are in Korea, and that makes a total sense that it's actually just fox spirit. And when you start to like look at all the different things, what you have to look at more is, what is it doing? Where is it coming from? How is it influencing people? And accept that we might not always have a good label for it, but look at the results, look at the practical aspect, and try to go from there. Like address that before you worry about like, but really, what the fuck is it? Because I've been asking that question for close to 50 years now, and I got to tell you that sometimes I'm like, I don't know, but I can tell you, in observing it, I can expect it to do this, this, and this. So this is how we should probably respond.
Right.
Gotcha.
But what does it mean? Fucked if I know.
That's great.
Like troubleshooting.
Yeah, troubleshoot it.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it's that's the most important thing, is like fix what's wrong, and
Right.
then you spend as much time as you want like theory crafting, analyzing, and like having the deep existential crisis of like, but how did that even happen?
That's great.
Makes sense.
All right. Next question. I love it. What crystal or amulet or anything else along those lines, in your opinion, are best for protection? Maybe for us investigators going out these client spaces, or even to tell the client what they should get, maybe to help their situation moving forward.
Full disclosure is, crystals and stones don't resonate for me, like they don't work for me at all. So my first consistent response for that is whichever one makes you feel protected, whichever one feels right to you. And for clients, the important thing is, again, understanding like, what is their worldview, what is their belief system, what are they comfortable with. I've found that the best protective thing is finding what speaks to that person's faith, whatever shape that faith takes. You can hand somebody like, the biggest, most powerful quartz crystal point you can find, and if there's no context and no meaning for them, it is just a rock.
Right.
And they might even feel like weirdly awkward about like, okay, here's a rock, go away. It's the same thing with like trying to like have somebody use sage for smoke cleansing. That's been adopted and pretty widespread at this point. But I remember back in the 80s where people were like, "What? That smells like bad weed, first of all, and why are you waving that around? Like, what is that even doing?"
Right. Yeah.
So the most useful things are the things that are useful to that person, that are meaningful to that person, which by extension, the most powerful protective talisman is a person's faith, their belief, their ability to believe that they are no longer a victim, that they have the capacity to be protected, and if they can't believe that they themselves can protect themselves, then they can be steered to believing that something outside of themselves, whether it is God or an angel or their spirit guide or that really shiny rock you picked up, can protect them.
Hmm.
The really shiny rock part is really useful for kids, for children who might not have the full mental capacity to start thinking about gods, goddesses, or the rest of it, but giving them a teddy bear that you name, that you arm with a little tinfoil sword and a little tin shield, and let them know that that guy is the one who will keep away the nightmares. Giving them something to believe in can help.
Definitely. That definitely makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. And I guess reeling it back to kind of what we touched upon a couple of times now, just in case we happen to run into this, because you never know. But in your opinion, because we just did a blog post on this as well, what is your take on the great debate of shadow people?
So, I've personally witnessed human ghosts, just a regular old person, appearing like a shadow, appearing as a silhouette, partly because they weren't quite they almost didn't remember what they looked like, and that was the best they were able to present themselves. And I have also witnessed the full-on classic shadow person where it's a little too spindly and a little bit wrong and the knees don't seem to go the right way, and that is just somebody's uncanny valley idea of what a person's supposed to look like. I think that some of them are definitely outsiders, something from elsewhere. That maybe they are just a watcher. They're here to observe. There's usually just a little bit of a sense of threat more than just I'm just watching you, almost I don't know, creepy peeping toms from Dimension X. So just because you're seeing a human shape in shadow as a silhouette, it's not automatically a shadow person. And as with all cases, what you should do is assess what other phenomena is going on, what other things can you observe, how are people, how are pets responding to this, can you communicate with it, does it seem to have a human intelligence, does it seem to be self-aware, does it seem to be aware of you, does it follow rules and sort of the laws of paranormal physics that you are accustomed to for a human spirit, or does it give you that uncanny valley feel of what the fuck am I actually dealing with, because that ain't right. And that last part has been my gut reaction to anything that I would class as, okay, that's what people mean when they're talking shadow people, that. I don't know what that is. It looks like a people. It is not people.
Gotcha.
Makes sense.
The weird ones wearing the top hats. I don't even know why that's a thing. Honestly, I sort of think that they're surfing our collective unconscious, the mythic imagination for this is what a people shape should look like. Only, by their nature, they're just getting weird Scrooge McDuck vibes and okay, sure, this is how I'm supposed to look like, Babadook Dook Dook. Which all by itself represents this is not a human psyche. It doesn't even understand how to people.
Right. Yeah, one of the options we discussed in the blog that I had found was that it's actually something from another dimension that's just peeking in, one foot in their dimension, 1 foot in ours, and it's just kind of watching, but it's not going to formulate completely because it's halfway over there. And so I think what we were trying to kind of debate was most people automatically see a shadow person and go scary, negative, bad. And sometimes that's not necessarily the case. I mean, them creeping on you is creepy, but it might not have the intent of being negative.
I will agree with that. Weird, uncanny, not necessarily evil, not necessarily malevolent, just it feels wrong. It feels like it doesn't belong. And hence why I'll kind of default to that outsider term. Those sorts are the ones that I'm most inclined to go, yeah, it's alien. Like, what other word will you use?
Right.
I don't think it landed in a spaceship because you sort of like watch it like fold in and out of reality. Doesn't need a spaceship, just whatever reason. And I've seen some that are definitely just here to observe, but again, they people so poorly that they hit every bad reaction of like, what the fuck is that?
Yeah, totally. Well, now that we've covered the topics of all the out there stuff, I'm just gonna reel it back in a little bit on our end. So kind of back to the basics of investigating. One of the things we kind of try to find a balance on is when we research a property or a location. I think one of the things we're always afraid of that you do kind of see on TV nowadays is you research a property so much that you walk in already thinking you know what the problem is. And you see them doing EVP sessions, asking questions, asking specific names and people when it might not even be there at all. So I guess my question to you is, what is your feelings on research, and what do you feel is the good balance between knowing where you're going but not being biased when you get there?
I think, well, research obviously has a place, and I respect it a great deal. But like one of the reasons that I enjoy Inspiration House as much as I do, and especially the first 2 years, was I didn't do that research right away. And if you have the luxury of going to a place and just getting the feel for it, just having your experience there, just letting something step forward, whatever it is, without the research, for at least one night's investigation, if you have that luxury, not everybody does, or have one person on the team be the research point, where they're the one who like does all of it, and then only brings that forward during the investigation if you're doing an EVP session and a name comes forward, and they can be like, follow that's important to what I've done. Now, this requires that person, with Paranormal State, the Paranormal Research Society, like each person had kind of their area of expertise and specialty. Even though I'm a pretty badass researcher, since I was working as a psychic, that meant I was never the researcher on any case that I was also working as a psychic, because it would front load me and taint me. Katrina was often on point for research, and if not Katrina, Elfie. And so you pick somebody in the team who your job is do all the research on the stuff and be the keeper of the secrets. And at the point when the team is doing the investigation and is there and things are happening, you can then, like, you can bring the receipts. You can be like, oh, by the way, here's this thing that I turned up that happens to have this name here, and here's why this name is important, and maybe we should pursue it. That person, and it helps if you swap out, so it's not the same person every single time, because I think you get a different experience with the investigation if you are the keeper of the secrets. And I think that every team should have somebody for each investigation where that's the case.
Okay. Yeah, that totally makes sense. Along those lines, because I think a lot of teams do tend to research a lot before they get there, what is one thing that you see a lot of teams doing nowadays that you would either tell them to do differently, or what do you feel is the best piece of advice you have for teams that you're like, nobody's doing this, why aren't you doing this? This is so important.
My best advice is go in with no expectations whatsoever. No expectations that it's haunted, that it's not haunted. Simply go in with your perceptions and your mind open, and be an investigator. Look into everything you can, and know what your strengths for that investigation are as well. So if you are someone who's really good at reading people, reading their body language, interviewing them, like play to those strengths. If you're someone who happens to be really good with the tech, play to those strengths. If you're the researcher, play to those strengths. But do not expect that what the clients have told you will be A, 100% accurate, 100% honest, or exactly how you will discover this haunting. If you've done research or if you're front loaded needlessly because that some of the it's a haunting that you've seen on TV, it's a haunting that like everybody's talked on, it's on the National Haunted Registry, it's impossible not to know that something's going on with this place. Look, Lizzie Borden, um, you know maybe it's not, maybe Lizzie's not going to talk to you that night. Maybe one of your investigators brought something in that's just like, hey, yeah, 5 people have been through this room and now I just want to know what's up here. And you won't have that experience if all you're doing is looking for Lizzie and you just ignore anything that doesn't seem to fit that narrative. So I guess follow Hapgood's rule that you only find what you're looking for. It's a rule that applies to science, and we should use scientific method when we're doing this stuff. Don't only look for anything, just look.
Okay. And I was just curious if we could touch on something you've actually already spoken about. You had mentioned earlier grounding, centering, and shielding, how important that is. And you mentioned it in your Ghost Hunter Survival Guide. I think shielding is something of a question mark for a lot of people. They know what grounding is, they know what centering is. Can you elaborate more on shielding and how that's different from the others?
And well, shielding, and it might be easier to frame it as filtering. So
Okay.
grounding, let go of stuff, centering, finding your center, and then finding a way to filter out something, whatever would otherwise be overwhelming you. Honestly, like shielding in the sense of like literally like covering yourself with impenetrable shields is not necessarily workable. Less so if you're psychic or sensitive at all, like you're going to feel very quickly suffocated. So thinking of it more as filtering, where you are creating a permeable barrier that keeps some things out, allows the passage of some things, and where you set kind of what it is you want in and out. Uh, a lot of folks kind of focus on visualizing, so, visualizing yourself with white light, as I said, or surrounded by, impenetrable blast doors. But what I've found more useful recommending to people is thinking about, cloth, drapes, partitions, veils, thinking about it in the sense of actually a really silly one, but it's very effective. You don't go ghost hunting without wearing clothes. And if you're going someplace where you know it's going to be really cold, you wear clothes that are a little heavier. And if you're going someplace where you know that there's a lot of debris, you're going to pick work boots and, heavier pants. So if you think about shields and psychic shielding as your psychic clothes, as the gear that you put on to protect yourself, your protective rig, and knowing that like I'm going to a client's haunting and I'm pretty sure there's nothing like really awful going on, or like I'm going to my office and the worst thing in my office is that one guy who won't stop talking who has halitosis. Like you're going to wear a different set of protective clothes.
Mhm.
So thinking of your shielding as what protective gear are you wearing? What's your PPE?
Mm-hmm. Which is really relevant these days. I think that would be a great way to communicate that with clients right now, seeing as it's like everybody is doing that right now. Like, what mask are you using today?
Mm-hmm.
How can you use that as a defense as to what's around you? So that's really pertinent. And then going back to actual investigations, I think we do things a little differently with our indoor investigations. I think it's very popular for teams. They do EVP sessions where they're asking questions and looking for interaction. We actually, at least for client private home investigations, don't do that because we feel that that's almost teaching the spirit there how to interact and could stir up activity after we leave.
Oh no, that's valid.
So we actually find it's more useful. We just kind of sit around with our recorders and we just have general conversation with each other. Or if we know, let's say the time period of whole is older, we might discuss topics from that time period. And we tend to get more responses via EVPs from the spirits around because they don't see us as taunting them or trying to get them or say, hey, play with this flashlight. And then all of a sudden the next day the client's like, why are my lamps going on and off? Oh, we have to do that. So that's kind of one thing that we've noticed that we do a lot differently than a lot of other teams. What do you feel that
I like those? I like those approaches. Those are incredibly. I like that.
We can't really take all the credit for that because we actually learned that from our affiliate team down in South Jersey. So we will give credit to them for that. Because we learned what we now say is the wrong way and, the way the TV shows do it. But I guess my question in regards to that is what do you see a lot of teams doing right now that you are like, no, why are you doing that? That's not a good idea.
Definitely a habit that has been enforced and reinforced by portrayals on TV. Provocation. Like, just barreling on into somebody's place and acting like you own the place, acting like the spirits have no right to be there at all, and just screaming at them, taunting them, being rude to them. I mean, my first problem with that is if these are human spirits, you wouldn't go into a nursing home and just start shouting at the residents unless you were a flaming asshole. And you would never be asked back.
Yeah.
So generally assume the basic humanity of the things that you're dealing with. Until proven otherwise, assume that these are human spirits, that they have some connection to the human realm, and treat them as such. So that means don't just ask them to perform like they're monkeys. Don't insult them. If you find that, the place you're investigating, like this woman lost her baby and like she haunts because she's still like pining after the baby, the answer is not to like poke on that and like leverage the lost infant as a way to get her to respond. Like, you monster, why? Appeal to the humanity instead. And it sounds like that's what you're doing. Like, just have a conversation, invite conversation. Some of the most effective teams in the field, in my opinion, currently, and what I've gotten to see for the results they get, are the ones who appeal to the basic humanity of the spirits and also engage them about their history. Talk to them about things that are important to them. Because that's how you get a conversation going with a person. You're in their house. You're probably an interloper. Like maybe the clients invited you, but the spirits probably didn't have any say in that at all. So being clear of I'm not here to bully you. I'm not here to kick you out unless you're doing something that's really not okay. I'm just here to talk. I want to know if you're here. I want to know if there's something I can do for you. And letting them know that you know a little bit about their story, and that the same things are important to you that are important to them. With Inspiration House, the one thing I've noticed is guaranteed to make that place active is when I'm talking about the history of the house. Because most of the spirits that are tied to Inspiration House are human beings who loved the house so much, they lived there for 30, 40 years, and they just didn't feel like moving out when they died. Like, they're not stuck. They just are happy with the space that they've occupied for as long as they had. So it's the most physically active, kind haunting I've ever encountered. The music boxes alone. But seriously, when I talk about the place and its history and just talk about how much I love it, that's when stuff goes just nuts in the house. Yeah, another hit would be good.
So another kind of important aspect to investigations, obviously outside of going to the home, performing an investigation, trying to figure out and troubleshoot what's there, is honestly we find the majority of our time is spent with client relations. So we're very hands-on with our clients. We make sure to follow up with them as much as possible. Make sure that they know we're not only there for them during the case, but if anything happens afterwards, like we're here for you. So what is your advice on in terms of client relations that you feel is something that's very important in order to make sure that they're taken care of?
Follow up. So you don't simply go to their house, do an investigation, go, yep, it's haunted, walk away, and then act like nothing's done. If you've gone to do a resolution to like somehow get the activity to cease or die down or like guide it into a certain more acceptable direction, I've found at least within like about 2 weeks is the time where you want to check back in with them because things will often start back up, especially if there's other triggers that you weren't able to assess or account for. So at the very least, doing like a callback within 2 weeks after the investigation to go, okay, have things changed? How are things going? Did activity pick up? Did it like what's just give me the update. Letting the clients know that that's going to be a thing to like kind of pay attention in the next couple of weeks. How does your home feel? What else? Make notes of anything that's unusual, or is a repeat phenomena. Um, it really helps. It's not always feasible, but it really helps to have somebody on the team who has some background in psychology, or some background in knowing how to talk to people in a way that gets them to open up, in a way that you can assess like where they're coming from, and that is as essential to a team that is client based as a researcher, as a psychic, as the tech guy or girl, and having somebody who's just really good at interviewing. So much, I think some teams really lose that aspect of the investigation because they get so excited about the actual ghost hunt. And you see so many portrayals of the ghost hunt on TV that, that's the romantic part, like that's the fun part. And sitting down and talking with people about their experiences doesn't feel as exciting. And yet so much is revealed there. So definitely like a client centered approach is amazing and helpful. At least a 2 week follow up, letting them know to expect that follow up, and coming up with sort of an action plan with the client for if this doesn't work, especially if like they perceive it to be a scary or negative haunting. If this doesn't work, what's our next step? How do we escalate? What's the technical business term for it? How do we escalate it when we like kick it up to the next person?
Okay. Um, so when dealing with a client situation, which is where our main focus is, and that's kind of the heart of our team is helping people. There are those cases where when you're at the location, you think you're there for a standard, what we call Casper case. And then all of a sudden, 15 minutes later, you're like, wait a second, this isn't what we thought it was.
Yep.
Has there, in those instances, obviously we're there for the client, but we also have to be mindful of protecting ourselves as well. So what's your advice in those situations, or has it ever happened to you where you actually have to say, okay, we need to right now, we need to professionally exit the property, and then but we'll continue to help you and come back when we're prepared to face what we now realize is here.
There are two things that I think everybody in this community can benefit from learning how to do. One, I don't actually know the answer. Like being totally comfortable saying I don't know the answer to that. That can be mitigated a little bit by knowing, but I know a guy. I know someone who might. And in the case of realizing that you're in over your head, going, I don't think we're the team for this job, but we will do our best to see what we can give you in terms of information, in terms of guidance, to either have you solve the problem yourself or find the right team for the job.
Mhm.
You know, it's pardon me, it's not admitting defeat to say, I don't know or I can't do this.
Right.
And I think it's a sign of a very mature team to be able to go, I actually don't know what we're dealing with, and I don't feel comfortable continuing until I have a better sense of what this actually is. Or, oh, shit, no, just not a thing, not a, this there is no point in having, everybody drowned. Like,
Yeah.
no.
Right.
So,
And
so no one beat a hasty retreat.
obviously, because we care for the client, we hate leaving in that manner. But at the same point, I don't think it's kind of like when you're on a plane and you're told to put your mask on before you help anyone else. It's kind of like we're trying to say, okay, we need to take a step back, look at the situation, and then if we need to, contact elsewhere. We actually, as our team, only deal with what we call the Casper cases, the human cases, and then we have another team that we hand off anything that we feel is above that too, because that's what they specialize in. Like, that's their deal. And what are your feelings regarding the field right now? I don't know, if you agree with this or not, but we tend to see right now there's many in the industry who have what you would like to call an ego and not necessarily want to admit, like, they're actually in it to be like, oh, I got this. I'm good to fight the demons.
Yeah. Well, the problem with that is when they actually run into a case that is exactly what they think that they're like, charging off to fix, and it smacks their teeth in. If the goal is to actually help the clients, they don't help anyone if everyone is now on the ground. I have some very strong opinions about, like, ego-driven investigation. Like, certainly, especially because it's a popular thing presented on TV. And there's a certain romanticism that goes with that. There's a certain of, like, I can be, Captain Save a Ghost.
Yeah.
And sometimes people's desire to become their hero or their idol is greater than their capacity to actually handle the problem. And if they really want to take a step back and assess that, the kind of harm that they can do to the people around them, both the clients and their own team, if they don't have an accurate assessment of, I don't know the answer to that, and this is above my pay grade.
Yeah, I think, like, branching off like what you just said right there is, I know us for a team, we look at it also as, if you go into a client's house and you have that moment where you realize you're walking into something that you didn't realize you were walking into. And it goes by, yes, we have to make sure we're protecting ourselves first. But what's your thoughts on when you walk into a situation like that? I mean, do you feel that, because I've always felt, I think we as a team always feel that if you try to be that ego-driven person, you're more or less probably also hurting the client very badly. I mean, you're probably putting the client in a lot of severe, possibly big danger, if you decide to try to stay there and take care of the situation without being that more mature team and saying, we can't do this. We could be putting you in serious danger. I mean, we would tell that to the client, of course, because that can add on to the client with being more nervous about what's going on. But do you feel like that's also a big thing too, like that you could really be putting the client in some serious danger as well?
Absolutely. So, I mean, let's say it's the worst case scenario. You walk in, you think it's a Casper case, and it's actually a big bad.
Yeah.
And you realize that you probably, one, didn't come equipped. You don't have anybody who's really equipped to deal with this, doesn't have the background to deal with it, but you're going to, like, give it the old college try. and all you do is punch it in the nose and make it angry.
hmm
And that's not a good not a good result for anybody.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's important to be very clear with clients at the beginning that like your purpose is to come in and assess, and if you think it's not something that you can handle, that you will do your best to hand it off to someone you trust who can. This is one of the things that I think makes it really essential for different teams to not approach this as a competition, but as a community where we build a network, where we build a group of people that we respect and trust, that we can trust enough to go, well, here's this thing, and here's what's going on, and this isn't quite our wheelhouse, but we know you've got more experience with this, that you can actually trust to like refer your client to. And building a network like that, I think, is really essential, especially when helping the client is your biggest, most important goal.
hmm
Uh, and yeah, absolutely, you can do more harm than good if you know go in there beating a Bible and screaming the power of Christ compels you, and you actually have no background and no ability to do anything for it. You know, you mostly now just have a big nasty thing that's mocking you for your mispronunciation of Latin, and knows that you're going to go away, and now that you've bloodied its nose or maybe just annoyed it, who is it going to take it out on?
Yeah.
Or heaven forfend, you actually piss it off enough that you do solve the problem for the client because now it follows you home.
Yep. Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah, not an outcome anybody really wants.
No.
No, thank you.
um, as a team, obviously it's important to have these same ideals. When you're working this closely with people on these locations where you do need to make sure you're trusting and protecting each other, it's almost the team dynamic is just as important as your dynamic with the client, because you're kind of there and depending on each other, and you have to make sure that you can trust each other in case something bad does happen. So we feel it's really important to know each other and be friends and recognize each other's personalities and quirks, because you see that slight little thing go, wow, that's strange for them to do that. And suddenly it's like, oh, wait, we have a problem.
Yes.
So in terms of building a team, what's your advice in finding that perfect dynamic so that you can be productive and trust each other to help the client?
You don't have to all have the same religious background or the same level of belief in things. You don't have to have the same level of instruction or anything. What you need is to have the same level of dedication and compassion. Like your goals are the same goals. Like at the end of the day, if you all actually want it to be the best result for the client. So that kind of camaraderie. And then the most important thing is everybody needs to be on the same page about communication. Talking with one another if there's a problem, solving problems, rather than just like, get huffy and like, sulk about it. So finding a way to make the group dynamic work and do it in a way that is how healthy, emotionally whole adults handle problems. Because there will be conflicts, there will be times where things don't work out right, there will be days where somebody's just had a shitty day at work and maybe they snap at somebody, and you need a team where you can rely on everyone to say, I'm not comfortable with that, or this wasn't okay, or hey man, are you okay? Like you seem like it's just been a rough time. Should you be in on this investigation? How much of what's going on with you right now is just going to taint that? And also the very practical field thing of spirits can influence us. Even residual hauntings can influence us. So if you know one another really well, then you can, as you said, identify when somebody's not acting right. An ideal team should be able to hang out with one another in a social situation, not simply ghost hunting. And actually, I think team building, stuff like that, where you also have a social aspect, where you are capable of palling around and being a little vulnerable with one another is pretty important. You can't get the perfect team if you just go, you know, I choose you, Bob, because you are the best archivist I've found, and I choose you, Martha, because everybody tells me that you're really psychic, but like Bob and Martha are just like, you know, oil and water, and neither of them is willing to talk to anybody, and, you know, secretly Bob just hates everyone anyway, and it doesn't matter how good somebody is if they're not comfortable just shooting the shit with you in a way that everybody's comfortable with. So, like, you know, can you sit together at a Denny's at 4 in the morning after the investigation and, like, you know, shoot the shit over pancakes and bad coffee and talk about, like, you know, what you want to do with your life? Are you people who are okay with, like, hearing about also life and not just ghosts? That's important.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we always say we're a paranormal family. So if somebody has something going on and they need to take a step back, you take a step back because you're of no good to our team if your mind is completely elsewhere.
Right.
And we care for you, so we want you to take care of yourself too. So in terms of team building exercises, is there anything you suggest? And you know, or even something like doing practices before investigations, like grounding, like a group grounding practice or anything along those lines before an investigation?
I mean, let me I mean, there's the cheesy, like, trust building things that we would do in theater that I actually think are just funny, like the group fall things that are just sort of silly, that I'm not going to recommend. Honestly, my biggest recommendation is go out, share a meal together. And not necessarily at a restaurant, but like go over to somebody's house, like everybody, like do a potluck. Like sharing food, like being casual is one of the most revelatory things we can do. I mean, you learn like what people like, what they don't like, how fussy they might be, and like you're giving something to one another. Right now, hopefully not COVID. So like, you know, obviously at a different time when it's like, you know, if you've been, you know, as a pod, if you've been socially distanced, so most of these recommendations are kind of pre-COVID and hopefully post-COVID.
Yeah.
But do things together, hang out together, um, share research together. If I had to imagine like the most ideal team building thing, it would be if everybody can take like a 2 or 3 day weekend at like an Airbnb or something, and you know do a casual investigation with one another, and also have to deal with one another, have meals together, play some games, uh, just be people together in addition to ghost hunters together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we try to do that. We try to have our dinners. But during COVID, we've been doing virtual like meetings and happy hours.
Yeah.
Kind of thing, just to keep in touch with each other.
So I've got a suggestion, and it might not work for your group. So I work with you know I've got an energy work group, and so for us with COVID, we can't get together and do energy work circles and whatever. So we have been trying to flex the muscles where we connect at a distance.
Okay.
Where we use virtual stuff, usually without a video, but just auditory, and we try to place ourselves in a shared space, like imagine in our case like our ritual space, our temple, but a shared cozy living room, and just try to be present in that place. Try to feel like remember what it feels like to be sitting in the same room. And for the psychic or sensitive folks, it's an interesting exercise because it helps build your muscles for remote work and remote viewing. It helps you like really kind of start to feel like what can I feel these people at a distance? What is it like? And it's an interesting exercise, especially because we are obligated to be at a distance right now.
Yeah.
And its results vary. Some people have a really hard time getting out of their head, and simply the imaginative aspect of reminding yourself what it feels like to be in a room together, to hang out together, can really help.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Definitely.
Yeah.
This
So
is
I
a
guess
fantastic conversation. I wanted to, just because I can tell Michelle's voice is starting to get a little rougher, if we can do a couple more questions, I think that would be great for winding the conversation down. This has been wonderful.
It got really rough when I ran out of hint, but
I know,
I'm good.
I know.
Lubricating
I'm
my
sorry.
No, it's okay. I always drink like way more water when I'm talking.
Mhm.
Probably not a bad thing.
no.
No.
Not one bit.
I actually did just have one last question, and it's more of a fun question for us.
Okay.
So we have what we like to call our oh shit moment, which is that moment where you're on an investigation or somewhere, and that's the moment something happens where you're like, oh shit, this is real, you know? So we were just wondering what yours was.
I've had it's interesting because there's always like these plateaus of belief, and then you're just like, oh shit. The one that really sticks with me, in college, my college owned a property called Thorn Acres. I ended up renaming it Whitethorn Woods because I didn't want the Jesuits to sue me. And I talk about it in haunting experiences. So every year around this time, we would go over there, and they would have us make kind of like a haunted experience for inner city kids. And it was also like a fall break retreat. So we could be out there in these cabins on this space for like, up to 2 weeks. And the first time I was there, I'm like, I think these are Fey haunted woods. Like, I'm not sure that I 100% believe in like the fairy lore I grew up with, but if there were fairies in woods, it would be here. And there were a lot of weird fucking things that happened there to like people all across like, here is a quote from the guy who was in the band with me. We had a metal band back in the day. And Dominic comes out from leading these kids around, and like he's white as a sheet. I mean, first of all, he's like a 6'2" fucking hockey player who was like the rare mix of metalhead and jock. I don't know how, but did. And like his mom was a witch, but he was Catholic, and like he was like, I respect your weird stuff, but it's not my weird stuff. He comes out of these woods and he's like, Mickey, what does a hellhound look like? And I thought he was shitting me, and then saw the look on his face. He's like, we saw this thing. And he describes it, and I'm like, that sounds like a fairy hound. And he's like, and then there was this sound, and it was like these things just swept past us. And I'm like, Charlie, did you just have the wild hunt sweep past you? Because that's fucked up, man. Okay. So there's that. And I mean, like, there were so many things that happened. To the point where, like, by the end of this weekend, we're like just looking at one another going, none of us drink, none of us smoke. Did they slip something in the water? Because this is just off the chain. So it gets to the point where, of course, we've had all this fun, we've done all this stuff, we've turned these 2 cabins on this space into like haunted houses, and now we got to clean up. And it's just Dominic and me and Barry from the band and my boyfriend at the time and Liz. And Liz ends up going, and then he's dwindling. We're just finishing stuff up, and this stillness just falls over the forest that we're in a way that like feels like the air is just waiting for something. Like you just like that sort of like, if you've ever been on an investigation, that moment where like the air just gets thick and tight, and it's waiting for something to happen. And like all of us just like look up with this like, the fuck is that? And nothing is making a noise in these woods at this point. Like, it just, everything shuts the fuck up. The layout was such that we had what we called the good house and the bad house. Like, everybody collectively agreed that that was the bad house. Nobody could explain why. The weekend made it pretty clear, like, why. And they were kind of like across a little gully from one another. So you had like this little footbridge, and there was a lake over here, and it had been part of like the canal lock system. And they weren't like little rustic cabins. Like, these had been somebody's summer homes that they donated to the college. We're on the other side of the gully, and there's the bad house with like the tennis court behind it, and suddenly blackbirds, and I don't mean just crows. This was the part that was weirdest at first, was grackles, crows. If the bird was black, it was part of this flock. It made no fucking sense, and they weren't spirits. These were physical damn birds, just erupt out of the woods and start landing on the house. They start on the roof on the bad house, and they just land and stare at us. Like, they make no sound. And I mean, like, they are blanketing the roof, and they just keep getting closer and closer, like just beady little-eyed fucking blackbirds just staring at us like, you're going now, right? Like, just go. And all this time, like, that sense of like tension and like almost, you can almost feel like this drum beat on the air. And these birds will just, they just would land and just sit and stare. It was the most unhooked thing, I think. And I wouldn't believe that it had happened, except Dominic was there, my ex-husband was there, Barry got into his purple tracker and was like, I'm the guy with the punch code to the gate, and I am the fuck out of here. I will wait at that gate for another 10 minutes, but I am not waiting for Cthulhu to come out of the woods, because that's what I'm expecting at this point. Cthulhu. I wanted to see, like, I was fox moldering this hard, where I'm like, but something's going to happen, and the birds just keep getting closer, and they're all the way up to the ledge, and they're starting to, like, on the bridge, and like my ex-husband at the time, David, was just like, we are going now. Dominic's gone, Barry's gone, it's just us, and I'm like, but I want to see, but I kind of don't, but I do. So I don't know what happened or what would have happened if the birds had actually gotten to us. Weirdest thing I've ever seen. I mean, because like there's weird stuff that you see, things fall off of walls, like you feel stuff, you get a cold spectral hand, whatever. You can kind of tell yourself you imagined it after a while. But a freaking horde of blackbirds just flying out of nowhere, landing and staring at you like they intend to eat you once they get close enough. When animals, when the physical world, like, conspires to be even weirder than the weirdest thing that happened that weekend, that is my, And I don't know if you've experienced this. It's a very normal bit of human psychology. When your ability to understand and accept something that happens in reality is pushed, your brain starts to like just eventually erode the memory and like just go, that we're not going to think about that. That's just going to be over here. I mean, we do it with trauma all the time, and with some of the like really off the chain spiritual experiences like paranormal stuff, we'll just, our brains, whether we choose to or not, will try to cushion us by like sticking it over here, you know, treating it like a pearl, wrapping it up with some stuff. And like if we go actively poking for it, we might be able to remember it. It's why it's helpful to always record everything, write everything down. Memory is fragile. Well, enough years had, you know, I graduated and everything. Like I remembered it, but I'd be like, but really? Like, was it really like that? Like, you know, Barry ended up being headhunted by the NSA, so he's like some cryptographer in a bunker now. Like, none of us have heard from him. He was a super math genius. Bad lead singer, though. As the other lead singer. Bad lead singer. Anyway, I mean, like, seriously, lyrics, I am God, so kill me. Like, we were in college, we were goth, it was really sad. Parts of it were good, it was fun. But anyway, so years later, Dominic is getting the band back together, and he's in Chicago now. And it's, you know, kind of like a reunion, birthday party, whatever. And I think it's like maybe 2004, 2005. And actually might have been probably 2004. So I go over there, and he starts telling the story. Like, it gets late enough that he starts telling the story. And I'm like, oh God, it wasn't just me. Shit. But those birds, man, what the fuck? Yeah, and I mean, he's just like, and you just stayed. I'm like, maybe not the smartest, but I really wanted to see. So that is my
Gotcha.
That's a good
Yeah, that's interesting.
the really cool thing with it was I wrote about that story in Haunting Experiences. My editor just didn't believe it. So she started to first of all wanted to see what place. She knew the real name of the place because she got to see what I'd changed it to. So she starts Googling, and I get this late night email where she's like, did you see these photos? Do you know the experiences that the other students have had there? And I'm like, no, I haven't gone back. And she just starts sending pictures that other John Carroll students have taken at that place. And I'm like, I'm really surprised the Jesuits haven't burned it down.
Well,
I mean, it's not harmful. It's just, it is a place where 100%, my assessment, my belief, fae, elementals, whatever you want to call them, dark fae, and they are mischievous. And if you do not play nicely, they are going to fuck your shit up. And Barry literally woke up in the lake. Barry was like, ha ha, I think there's fairies. I'm a chaos magician. I'm gonna catch one and try to feed it to people. He was, and there was a point where I was like, Barry, what are you doing? And he's like, he walks in with his, huddled over his hands, and I there's this sense of something. I'm like, whatever you've got, whatever you think you've just captured, you need to let that shit go right now. He's like, oh no, oh, you can see that? I'm like, I don't want to. I seriously don't. Why would you do that? Wanted to see if I could. God help us. Okay, so he eventually listens to me, lets it go. He goes to bed that night, and I should say Barry was not prone to sleepwalking. Barry was actually quite rational, aside from the sort of chaos magician thing. Ridiculously brilliant, calculus when he was 9 kind of guy. He wakes up walking into the lake.
Wow.
He is chest deep.
Wow.
And becomes aware. Oh. And then we have this conversation as he comes out dripping. we're this is early morning and everything. I've slept in, and eventually there's Barry, and he's still in the sopping wet clothes. He's like, so do you think if fairies wanted to fuck with me, they could make me do this thing? And I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, I woke up in the lake. Did what? To be fair, at this point, this is kind of normal for what's happened in this space. Everything weird. I'm not even talking about the thing that burst out of the fucking wall. It's all in the story. It was nuts. But yeah, that's my oh shit moment.
Nice.
And also my, okay, I think fairies are real. They're not Tinkerbell. Also, Irish family, don't fuck with fairies. I totally get it now.
Yeah.
Love that.
Wow.
Thanks for sharing.
awesome story.
Yeah, thanks for sharing.
I don't talk about it a lot because there's it wasn't just one thing. It wasn't even just 5 things. We're pretty sure one of our friends got possessed there. We're just not sure by what.
For you guys, we got to meet you at the beginning of the chat. How can people find more about your organization? If somebody wanted to book you, where would they find you online?
We have not only a website, but we have Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram where they could easily DM us. I believe our handle on Instagram is Epicedium NJ, correct?
That might be Twitter.
Oh no!
Yeah.
Anyway.
Epicediumparanormal.org.
That's
Yep.
That's it.
You'll find it all there.
Yep.
So,
All right. Thank you so much for putting this, coming up with all of the questions and working with us through all the figuring out how this would work. This has been a fantastic conversation.
yay.
Thank you for
Yes.
having
And I
Yeah,
got to
thank
talk
you for
about
having us.
Whitehorn Woods.
Yes, thank you so
Or,
much.
Thorn Acres. Seriously, very fucked up piece of land.
And I believe it.
I can't.
No, seriously, you've met Dominic. Mickey, what's the hell
I
house look
haven't.
like?
Oh my
Oh
goodness.
God, that's right. You haven't met Dominic. Shit. Anyway.
Thank you all so much for the conversation.
Thank
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So,
No, this is delightful.